Hello and welcome to AXSchat. This week things have gone a little bit off course. We were meant to be welcoming Sean Gilroy and Lena Hack. Unfortunately, Sean has had an accident on his bike and is otherwise indisposed. So we're going to continue and talk a little bit about the project that I've been working with Sean and Lena on, and which was the basis for this chat. We want to obviously wish Sean a speedy recovery. Sean, hope you get better soon. And this is definitely proof that being a couch potato is better for your health.
I don't think that is true. If you go out and exercise, you get hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Sean. Poor Sean. And I know Sean and Lena were both going to try to do it, but he just really is under the weather.
So the reason that we scheduled this chat in the first place was because we've been collaborating with, and when I say we, Atos has been collaborating with Sean and Lena and Project Cape on a number of things. We've done a joint project on training materials, which came out of Lena's brain, which are based on the zombie apocalypse. So this is an unconscious bias training. It's a game, and I blogged about this recently. But we developed this based upon a workshop that Lena had originally conceived, and we turned it into a game, which we've done and developed collaboratively. And then the next step was we were looking at how we could use things like virtual reality to increase awareness and so on. So we're wanting to talk about learning styles, and we're running a project based with a university out in Barcelona, looking at using virtual reality and immersive gaming to create empathy and to increase awareness. And what we wanted to do was look at the subject of learning styles. So today's chat and the questions on Twitter will be based upon how you learn and how we can improve training. Debra, I know you've got questions.
I do. And so what we're going to do today is, since unfortunately Sean and Lena weren't able to join us, and you know a lot about the program, we're going to ask you some questions. So I was wondering if we could back up a little bit, and Neil, you could just tell us who Lena and Sean are. Now, a lot of people that are part of AXSchat they're going to recognize the little Hulk and everything, but and also, is this tied into BBC? So tell us more about that.
Okay, so Sean and Lena both work for the BBC. Sean is head of cognitive user experience, I think it is, and Lena is the lead researcher around cognitive user experience within the BBC. We've been working with them for a couple of years at least now, maybe slightly longer, on various different projects looking into how we can support neurodiversity in the workplace, but also wider than that, looking at how we can support neurodiversity in general. So the remit is not just within the BBC, but also CAPE, which is, I think, stands for Create a Positive Environment, is something that that Lena and Sean have been very keen to take wider, and have been collaborating with a number of organizations, of which Atos is one, and I've been working with them on some of this stuff for some time, but they're immersed in it day to day.
I know that when Lena was the mystery guest or the surprise guest at Susanna's Funka, which we've also had Susanna on the program before, not this year, but the year before, and she talked a lot about virtual reality and, actually autism, and really showing how people like Lena can add such great value to society and certainly in the workplace. Is this all tying together? these activities? Because I know she blew the audience away with her brilliance.
Yes. So one of the things that they created a while back was a simulation of what it's like to experience sensory overload in a working environment. So they were using virtual reality headsets and sound to put you inside a building, inside a meeting room, inside a BBC building, and for all sorts of additional overlays of sound and visual simulation to give you an idea of what it's like living in someone else's shoes. And I think that some people found that quite uncomfortable, and so there's a lot of creativity coming out of this team, and obviously we like creative people, and that we want to work with. So I'm always happy to publicize the work that Lena and Sean are doing, and wherever possible to work with them and support it through my own team.
And I think it's so interesting that BBC has really dug into this in a way we've never seen any other brand do the things that BBC is doing. And I obviously from the United States, and we love the BBC over here. We watch the programming. It's my favorite programming choice. And I was tweeting and chattering about this appearance today, and I had multiple people say, I love BBC's programming. It's so accessible. Why? Why does BBC care? And I know Atos has been engaged in these conversations, and it's just really interesting watching the unfoldment and actually the innovation coming from your side of the pond.
Okay, so well, obviously I can't speak on behalf of the BBC, except that I can say that as a public sector broadcaster, it's absolutely their remit. It's built into their charter and everything else, that they must serve all of the public, not just a part of the public. So they absolutely have to deliver accessible programming. As Gareth Ford-Williams, our first ever AXSchat guest, would remind us, they're not actually covered by the Equality Act because they're covered by the broadcasting legislation instead. But they like to go above and beyond the expectations of the Act. So I think it's something that's definitely been built in. It's something that they are actively pursuing as part of their wider diversity agenda. So they've been looking at how they can get more people in front of and behind the camera. And I think it's an organization that has genuinely been leading on experimentation and ways of working and ways of presenting technology and information for the last 100 years. So they're just continuing a tradition for the organization.
Antonio, let me turn over to you to give you the mic.
Thank you, Debra. So can you tell us a little bit more in relation to the platform that you're building in terms of VR, or if it's something that you can also adjust for other scenarios, not just the one that Lena and Sean have been working on in terms of simulations in relation to autism?
So we are working with a university on this, and it's the current platform is one that is already established, and what we're doing is putting or proposing to put in content onto that platform. So yes, it is transferable. Yes, it could be used by other people to do other things. In this particular case, it's just a platform that is designed to be immersive and using sound and vision to create that experience.
I have a question, if that's okay, Antonio. But so Neil, how does this tie into different learning styles? I mean, I know, I can immediately think of a few ways, but I know that originally that was really going to be the topic of what we were talking about today. So how is the work that they're doing over the BBC that's so creative and amazing, how does that tie into making sure that we understand how people learn differently?
Well, I think that's partly why we're wanting to do the research to understand better and how we might use the understanding of learning styles and apply that to the workplace, because workplace training has generally been, dare I say it, a little sucky, and a little bit focused on, just click here, listen to this, look at these 150 PowerPoint slides, have a quiz at the end. Thank you very much. Box ticked, off you go. So, so I think that's something that we're all conscious of wanting to challenge, and also that might work for some people, but it doesn't work for a lot of others. And so we need to find ways of making knowledge stick, because that's the other thing. Lena and I and Sean had discussed about how the fact that you can go into a training session, have people talk at you for, and even face-to-face training, have people talk at you for an hour, 2 hours, and come out the other side knowing nothing, because you've glazed over. 1 second,
and
I need
brain's
to change
a little foggy, right?
Yeah.
Brain's a little foggy after all that. And then we have some technical problems. We appreciate Neil letting us put him on the spot at the last minute. Neil, I know that both you and I, you were a lot more engaged, but you and I have been involved with the W3C WIC AGS efforts to make sure that cognitive guidelines are part of the standards. And I know you've written articles about neurodiversity and making sure that, we're all included. It seems to me a lot of this stuff ties together into, once again, we can speak at you and talk to you, whether I'm doing it from, I'm doing a commercial, I'm doing, it's always interesting when somebody does a really cool ad that everybody loves, but none of us can remember who sponsored the ad and what the brand wanted to get from the ad. I think that's always a major fail, but it's the same thing with education. And I'll give you an example. Whenever I remember there was, I'll call them out, Verizon, because Verizon's done a lot of work to include people with disabilities and accessibility and everything in the United States. And years ago, they had a course that all managers had to take. It was a mandatory course. And if you didn't take it, you could not apply for a promotion. And the course was not accessible to many of their managers that were blind. And so they came to my team at the time, and we made the course accessible. So this is certainly about looking at all the different learning types, but it also ties into everything we talk about all day long on AXSchat, which is everything has to be accessible to all of us. Now, can we go in even deeper and really consider the learning styles like we have? But I think it's really cool, though, the work that BBC has done, especially with Lena. Lena's brain is a really fascinating brain. And I think it's so cool that a brand as big as BBC sees that and then is tapping into how do you really let these people thrive so that we can improve society and the workplace for all people. I think there's all these amazing benefits that are going to come out of the work that ATOS has done and working and partnering with BBC.
Yeah. So I think it's a difficult thing to do, to understand all of the different ways that people learn. I think it's something that organizations generally haven't taken on board. And I'm with you in the principle of enabling people to access to training and opportunities is really important. I think that this is something that we've certainly seen within our own organization, a recognition within our learning and development teams that they need to be making the materials available to everyone, and there's work ongoing within our learning and development team to make stuff technically accessible. I think it's a strong message that we sent out recently, whereby we had a tender out for some training, and one company said that they weren't really that bothered about accessibility, and they lost that contract.
Yay.
Because the other company supplied information about what they were doing to deliver accessibility. And I think that sends out a powerful message to the company about that, the intentions of our organization to change things and to procure stuff accessibly. It doesn't mean that we always get it right.
No, it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
It is. And I'll tell you something else, Neil, you make me think of, I remember there was a company in the United States, and they had created all this HR training material. And so they had brought it to me so that I could get it out to a lot of the corporate brands I work with. And I said, is it accessible? And he's like, sure, you can access it 24 hours a day. I said, oh, no. I'm wondering, is it accessible to people with disabilities? And he was like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, okay, well, so I tried to explain it to him. So then he came back and he said, well, I'm willing to go ahead and do that. Why don't you do all the work to see if it's accessible, tell us everything we have to do all of this stuff for free, and we'll consider doing it. And I was like, okay, no. And the companies that are going to take this seriously to make sure their training, their materials, everything that they're doing are accessible to all of us, those are the companies that we're going to do business with. And I really believe that brands like Atos and others, and I know obviously BBC is a brand as well, maybe not a corporate brand, but I think the innovations we're going to see, organizations like yours, Neil, and organizations like BBC and others. So I like to hear when a company like Atos says, well, if you want to bid on this contract, it's got to be accessible for all of us. You don't want to make it accessible? We'll pick somebody that's going to do it. So I appreciate that leadership, Neil.
Well, in this particular case, it was from someone other than me, and that's even more gratifying, to be honest.
I agree.
So.
No, we know how difficult it is to create scenarios where you are developing training, and that training can be used by everyone, because in your organization, because sometimes you don't really know who is going to exactly be engaged with that piece of training. What do you think it will be the best way when you are creating accessible training to identify the needs of the users?
Well, I mean, obviously you've got standards, and the easiest way, if you are commissioning training, is to make sure that stuff adheres to standards. But that doesn't capture a lot of the requirements for people with cognitive accessibility needs, as we know, and that's that's part of the rationale behind the cognitive accessibility task force within the W3C. Even WCAG 2.1 won't capture all of the requirements for cognitive. It's a work in progress. I think that there will be several iterations before we get to a point where even most of the stuff is captured, but then that's the nature of standards creation. I think in terms of development, you can do a number of things, and I think that our friends at Barclays have done a great job in creating accessible personas. We've also developed our own set of personas for people with disabilities, and today I was talking with Nicole Windman at SAP, who's their accessibility lead, and she was telling me about the great work that they've done on creating personas for people with disabilities. And I think they've gone the furthest in that they've made videos of this stuff. And I hope I haven't got her in trouble with her compliance team for talking about internal stuff, but essentially, what they're doing is really, really good. And I know that SAP get a hard time about accessibility, including from me. But they are making efforts, and I think it's worth praising them for the efforts that they are making. So I think that you can look to get your developers in tune to the needs of people through tools like personas, and then you can test with users, and you can test with people with disabilities and check and validate your assumptions. Now, obviously, depending on how you do your development work, how you test will differ. A lot of people are developing stuff in a very agile way now, and even doing DevOps and even doing things like daily releases. Now that can cause issues for accessibility testing, and because gathering together a whole bunch of people with differing disabilities to test stuff usually takes time. Not every company or every department has access to these people 24/7, and therefore daily release schedules could put quite a load on the accessibility team in terms of testing. So I think what needs to happen is there needs to be a bunch of work done working with the guys that are doing the development, so that they understand what these needs are, that they need to work with a range of people with a range of different disabilities to get that understanding, so that they can then be able to do quite a lot of the validation work on the day-to-day stuff themselves, because it's in those kind of rapid cycles it becomes very difficult to engage people all of the time. But there needs to be that level of quality control. Plus, with a daily release, you might only be testing like a single button or a couple of little lines of code. So therefore, you don't want to be going to the massive expense of bringing people in and getting everyone to do this, that, and the other, especially if, as with lots of companies, those testers are external, because you're not relying on your own staff.
Right. Well, Neil, thank you so much for telling us about, the topic for tomorrow. Well, I know that we sort of put you on the spot. You did a great job, and we appreciate it. We appreciate you stepping.
That's okay.
You know a lot about it, and I think it's very exciting to see all the innovation coming out of from the UK and Europe. And I know that we really appreciate our supporter Barclays, and you had mentioned, the work that they're doing, but we also appreciate you, Neil. I know Antonio and I really do appreciate you. So we're looking forward to tomorrow's chat.
Yeah. No, I think it will be good. And I think it will be great to demonstrate the outcomes of what we're doing. So just to remind people, the questions that we're asking are really to help us inform us as to some of the key issues that people are finding with training and with how they learn, so that we can feed that into the development process with Lena and Sean and the guys out in Spain. So we want to hear all ideas. Particularly, we're focused on neurodiverse traits. We've got a lot of people with neurodiverse traits amongst our audience. Yes, we do still want to hear from the deaf, hard of hearing, blind and VI communities, but those needs are better understood for the most part in terms of how people access training than the learning styles. So it's less about the technical accessibility. What we really want to understand is how people learn, and how does that knowledge stick.
And this is the kind of topic that relates with organizations who are using technology in terms of learning and development of their employees. This doesn't relate only with what the topic that we usually talk on AXSchat on accessibility and inclusion. This resonates to everyone that has an interest in education and learning in today's world.
Yes.
Yeah,
indeed.
Good point. Well, thank you again, Neil, for letting us put you on the hot seat this morning. You did a really good job. And our hearts go out to Sean. We hope he gets better really, really soon. And we adore and love Lena. And we look forward to seeing Sean and Lena continue to make the world a better place. So, Neil, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Antonio.
Okay. Right. Get well soon,
And thank
Sean.
you, Barclays.
Thank you.
Thank you.